our next speaker here, guys, is Kirk Ballou from the software agency called TouchTitans.com. All right. So I hate doing all these disclosures, guys, but here goes again for the 100th time today. Just assume that every project that you hear me talk about, I'm invested in it. Every people that you hear me talk about, I'm invested in them too. All right. So the lawyers, the software agencies. So Kirk, we met through Twitter, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we met through Twitter. And by the way, Kirk is also one of the co-organizers, co-sponsors of this event also. So thank you, Kirk, for making this happen. And so we needed to build, you guys, I mentioned to you guys, there was some software, like the NASDAQ 100, there's the Dow Jones Industrial Index, and there's the S&P 500 Index. And we really needed this and some other portfolio management tools to manage our personal portfolios on our team. And it got to the point where it was extremely difficult. We spent so much time trying to manage our portfolio, manually. So we need to get to a point where, hey, we need some software to help protect our portfolio, reduce volatility. And we also have clients that they need help in this arena also, and they're not aware of the software that needs to be built. And since we have a background in training people to trade stocks, futures, forex, options in the past for many years. So we understood that. So we migrated some of that technology and the infrastructure there and brought it over to the cryptocurrency space. And the people that's behind it is Kirk and his firm, TouchTitans.com. And so there is, I guess, what do you call that? A bias or whatever, because we're talking about him and he's building the software for our company. Okay, so. Kirk is going to go talk about, I invited him to come here and speak for all the businesses here and the folks who want to use the blockchain in their business. There's like over 1,500 cryptocurrencies out there. There's different blockchains out there that you may or may not be aware of. And so I asked Kirk, hey, could you come and just share with everyone if they're considering using the blockchain for their business, which one should they look at, should they consider, and break it down, make it simple so everybody can understand it. So everybody give a warm welcome to Kirk Ballou. All right?
Thank you. Thanks, Ty. Yeah, so we're in. Can we do a quick round of applause again for Ty? Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, a little background on me. Kind of to Ty's point, why listen to the guy up here on the stage? So I've been building software for a long time, and just some of the contributed to Bitcoin Private and Z Classic. The app agency I started a long time ago. We work with a lot of international brands like Red Bull, CNN, and Nat Geo. So I've been coding for a little bit. And recently also I joined an Israeli startup that's doing basically urban farming on the blockchain. One of the major significant things that their machine learning team can do is diagnose crop disease through photos. So a regular farmer with his iPhone or Android can go take a picture of their crop, and just like the cancer diagnosis app that would look at a mole and give you an idea of its cancers, this is something that it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. So that, and I get to work with a core Ethereum guy. So yeah, super excited about that. And the last thing, amongst the things we've done over the years, if you look at mind-controlled Tesla, we've hooked up brainwaves to move around my wife's Tesla. She wasn't so crazy about that, but it worked. So basically, I mean, like Ty was saying, there's thousands of cryptos out there. If you're wanting to build an app or a service on the blockchain, I just wanted to cover a few of them. There's a lot of them coming out, but just kind of filter down as far as capabilities and advantages to each one. And if you see on the right, the transactions per second, the designer was a little bit more optimistic. So he said 16, I said 15 as far as transactions per second there. So this is kind of where it's at. In EOS, I'll also mention that that's testnet. That's not publicly deployed yet. It's still centralized. In that single-threaded core, So that can be scaled on a 100 CPU unit to 1 million transactions a second. And I'll explain why that's important. This is the amount of data going through. This transaction threshold for Ethereum, that's why CryptoKitties essentially brought Ethereum down for taking a transaction took an entire day. So they're working on solutions to this. The primary one is Plasma. And that one is still very early stage, kind of white paper and prototype stage. But Plasma is essentially going to be an off-chain solution, just like Lightning Network. So there's advantages and disadvantages. So you basically would have a payment channel. Then you have Cardano. So Cardano is by one of the original Ethereum founders, Charles Hoskins. And just like Marco, is Marco in the room still? Okay. So there's few engineers I've met in crypto that are that level. I would say Marco's up there and Charles is up there as far as really brilliant engineers. And if they're involved on a project, you should definitely pay attention to it. That's not investment advice. That's more engineering advice. And then you've got Stellar. So Stellar is it's a lot like Ripple, except for they've created a ICO and token platform. So if your business model, your software required a token, but it didn't require complex logic or smart contracts, it's a great high threshold platform. And EOS, as Brock Pierce, one of their investors, called it kind of Ethereum on steroids, right? So this is just an example for companies that are getting into the space and don't fully understand the limitations. What happened with Kirk, they have 300 million users. And they originally in their white paper, they were going to build everything on Ethereum. And they raised their funds on the Ethereum blockchain, like most ICOs are doing. And then they quickly realized that they can't have 15 million monthly active users. They can't have that much traffic going through the Ethereum blockchain yet, right? So what they're doing is they're switching over to the Stellar blockchain because their need isn't very heavy on the smart contract side, so it's a good fit for them. Props, who was here earlier, so I've met the CTO, I've talked to the development team. They have a really great plan for handling 40 million users on the Ethereum chain by handling a majority of the transactions off-chain. So a lot of the settlement and transactions will be able to be synced in one batch, right? And then you've got solutions to this for businesses entering the space, but that's also where you'd have to evaluate with Simple Token if the services they offer are enough to handle your off-chain needs, right? So let's see. Ethereum, there's a lot of advantages there. And this is just a snapshot of the current state. You've also got to consider there's a tremendous amount of first mover advantage here. You've got Ethereum Alliance, you've got a lot of capital going into Ethereum that's going to help them get past where they're at right now. One of the big disadvantages I see is their virtual machine is pretty bulky, like where Neo and some of these other chains have a much more efficient virtual machine. So as I mentioned, the Plasma solution is created by the same guy that did the Lightning Network. So it's essentially off-chain settlement. And there's some really cool, unique use cases that are coming out of this, like the ERC 721, non-fungible, if you heard of CryptoKitties, is basically the ability to create a non-fungible asset, or in other words, a unique asset. Could be a baseball card, a CryptoKitty, Decentraland, in that case, it's virtual land in a VR reality that you're selling. But there's groups like Consensus already looking at having that tied to an actual asset like a property. So you could look at digital ID. You can look at anything where you're holding a digital asset that represents a physical asset. So this is something that I think other chains are definitely going to adopt. There's one called Tron that's already doing something like this called Crypto Dogs, right? So Jeb McCaleb, original creator of Mt. Gox, but he sold it before that big hack happened. And then, what's good about this is these languages that are listed, these are common languages that developers are used to, as opposed to Solidity that is a lot younger languages. So a lot of the things you'll run into with Solidity, just because it hasn't been around as long, Python and JavaScript, there's a lot more developers out there that know it very well, right? So there's already been a few major chains, Mobius, and then Kik has switched over after their fundraise on this one. And he's also the creator of Ripple. So I describe Stellar as it's like an open source Ripple with the capability to create your own token on it. Now Cardano, this is one of my favorite chains. Primarily, I like that Charles himself, brilliant engineer, is being built in Haskell. Now, most of these chains, like if you look at Ethereum and some of these other ones, there's a lot of code being thrown out, but there's not like a real vetting process to it for the quality of the code. So at least with Cardano, they're going through an academic review process on the code they're putting out. It's still not a guarantee on quality, but it's at least better than nothing, right? So basically, they're building out similar capabilities. It started in Japan. It's got a lot of, a lot of traction already. It's become pretty popular, and its transaction volume is 250 transactions a second. But it's kind of he could explain a lot better than I do, but kind of mesh network where it's localized traffic as opposed to like Ethereum is globally limited to that transaction volume. Oh, and also it's React and Node can be used for dApp development, which is most of the apps that we do for a typical website these days are React with Node.js backend, or they're using Go. So a lot of these newer chains are going there versus the other chains that aren't. Then EOS. The thing I don't like about this is they had a year-long ICO, and but they are at the point they're ahead of schedule as far as the testnet is there. They've proven 50,000 transactions on a single-threaded core on their testnet, so it's higher volume than anyone else in the space right now. They're also dedicating a large amount, it's like 1.1 billion, to projects on their platform. So they've already got Everpedia on board as far as a token that's going to be on their platform. So this is the level we need to get to, though, for what we do in the other space. When we look at apps, a transaction threshold of a couple thousand transactions isn't very much. If you look at a regular iPhone app that goes to 192 countries, if it's a significant audience, if it's a significant brand, you're well beyond the 250 transactions a second volume. So CryptoKitties is a relatively small app compared to those. So you'll start seeing major brands once the mainnet volume is to where it can handle this. Whichever chain gets there first is where I feel you'll see a lot of developers gravitating there. So I'll go back to that. Oh, there's another thing I wanted to point out on this. The other significant thing here on Ethereum that's already being done by Civic and Uport, which is one of the spokes of Consensus, is identity. So if you think of Equifax, you've got a centralized server that's hosting your data, and a single point of failure with the servers. Whereas in the Civic or Uport case, your identity is on what you possess. It's encrypted to your phone, and you only expose the data that you need to for like a sign-in, or if you're at your doctor, you're only exposing the specific data that you need to for that, whatever the use case is. So definitely the model that I hope at some point our credit agencies switch to, because it's a lot more secure. And I'll go back to this one. Cool. So there's a lot of other chains that could be talked about. There's Icon, who it's another involvement. It's using proof of stake. It's a chain out of Korea that they're already working with the government and similar kind of DApp development capabilities. But still consider it's still very early on in blockchain. This field's only a few years old, so it's kind of like early internet. So in the early internet days when we build apps, a lot of the services we have with AWS and everything, we'd have to build that stuff from scratch with like PHP. And what you have out of the box now with EC2 servers and scaling, that we didn't have that luxury. So it was like one of those things where now you can handle transaction volume on a website. You don't even have to think about it. Versus that's kind of where the blockchain is. You have to worry about, okay, are we going to process on chain more than this limit that we're running into with Ethereum, right? So, all right. So that's a presentation. I'll open up to questions. Go to the end. Oh, and also if you have any questions on Flux, let me know. It's the farming IoT thing.
So on the Flux project, I'm just curious if you guys are developing your own sensors, or actually maybe, I don't know if you want
Yes,
to on this a little bit.
yeah, I'll explain it. So our Israeli team has created, it's called a Miko device chip. So initially it's going to be air, water, soil measurements. And if you think of it kind of like BAT token, it's rewarding farmers for providing data to the network. And they get rewarded in tokens for that. Now, for a new farmer or someone that's starting out, if you think of urban farming, if they're in the same area, they're growing a similar crop, it'll give them suggestion if anything's off, like too much water or too much soil. The other side of that is growers and people who want to test one soil versus the other. They could get true field metrics out of this. And the other part of that is the whole crop disease diagnosis. So this is kind of how the ecosystem works, if y'all had any questions on that. Cool.
Are you integrating into something like IBM Watson or another type of platform that allows you to actually do the classification for the diseases?
No, they're building their own machine learning system. So it's gonna be an off-chain processing, and the reward system would be a peer-to-peer transaction based. So if your data is useful to me, it would be a peer-to-peer payment.
Okay. Yeah, just for the classification of the disease itself.
Oh,
It's
okay.
interesting that you're not using a system that's already in production. Google's invested billions of dollars into the classification of images, including diseases of plants and other things, as well as IBM.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just wasn't sure, because you're going to need a lot of data to train the actual algorithms for those diseases.
Yeah, we're starting with one crop that we'll pick like wheat or something where we focus on one disease first and get that working really well before we move on to the next one. But definitely worth looking at if you know of APIs that already are would accelerate that. Yeah.
When EOS says that they do however many transactions per second on a test net, when you take it out of the test net, I guess, environment, is it the volume of users that can stray results, or maybe an unknown error?
Well, you have a controlled environment running it on a test net versus when they roll it out decentralized and there's multiple nodes, that's where if the user volume gets a lot higher, if it's going to sustain that same transaction volume. That's kind of what Cardano's done. It started off centralized. They're doing a controlled rollout of decentralizing it.
I guess that's all the questions, right? So,
Okay, cool.
hey, everybody give Kirk a hand, right?